There is no doubt that these days we are facing signs of hot regional conflicts, which may expand with time to reach a third world war, the devastation of which will spread everywhere. And whoever says that he is far from the harms of these conflicts is lying, because they will affect everyone, whether economically, physically, or psychologically. So what the causes of the war taking place in the Middle East from the beginning? Israel, densely populated on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, is the only country in the world where Jews have a majority. Israel has been locked in a struggle with the Palestinians and its Arab neighbors over ownership of the land, which many Jews, Christians, and Muslims consider holy land since the founding of the State of Israel in 1948. The partition of Palestine and the establishment of the State of Israel in the aftermath of World War II was the culmination of the Zionist movement's ambitions to establish a state that would bring together diaspora Jews in one country. In the wake of the Holocaust, international pressure for international recognition of a Jewish state escalated, and in 1948 the establishment of the State of Israel was proclaimed, following a vote at the United Nations in favor of partitioning Palestine. Since then, the history of the region has been marked by conflicts between Israel on the one hand and the Palestinians, represented by the Palestine Liberation Organization, and the Arab states on the other. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forced to flee their homes and lands in the 1948 war, in which Arab armies came to support the Arab Higher Committee in Palestine. Israel lost about 1% of its population in the fighting, which ended with a series of fragile armistice deals. Since then, Israel has evolved dramatically, transforming from an agrarian state run on a collective cooperative model to an economy based on advanced and pioneering technologies. Israel absorbed Jews from Europe, the Middle East, North America, and finally from the former Soviet Union and Ethiopia. But conflict with the Arab world, including major wars in 1948, 1967, and 1973, as well as smaller wars such as the Suez War in 1956, and the Lebanon Wars of 1982 and 2006, continued to dominate political life in Israel. The relationship with the Palestinians is an important factor in Israel's domestic and security policies. Palestinians living in the West Bank and East Jerusalem have been suffering under Israeli occupation since 1967. The settlements built by Israel in the West Bank, where about 500,000 Israeli Jews now live, are illegal. The point of view of international law despite Israel's defiance of it. The conflict in Gaza. Israel withdrew its troops and settlers from the Gaza Strip in 2005, ending an occupation of the Strip that lasted for nearly 4 decades. But Israel still controls the air and sea zones, and therefore the United Nations still considers the Gaza Strip to be occupied territory. After the Islamist group Hamas took control of the Gaza Strip in June 2007, Israel intensified its blockade of Gaza. In 2008 and 2014, Israel launched 2 major military attacks on Gaza, saying it wanted to stop firing rockets from the Strip at targets inside its territory. Israel and Egypt signed a peace treaty in 1979, but Israel did not begin negotiating with the Palestinians until the early 90s, years after the Palestinian uprising against the occupation. Despite handing over control of the Gaza Strip and parts of the West Bank to the Palestinians, the two sides have yet to reach a final peace agreement. Issues such as the status of Jerusalem, the fate of Palestinian refugees, Jewish settlements, and attacks by Palestinian armed groups from time to time are the main obstacles to reaching a final peace agreement between the Israeli and Palestinian sides. Some important milestones in Israel's history. 1917. Britain takes control of Palestine after the expulsion of the Ottomans and issues the Balfour Declaration, through which it supports the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people. The promise included the inviolability of the civil and religious rights of non-Jewish peoples in Palestine. The Balfour Declaration states, His Majesty's government view with sympathy the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, and will do their utmost to facilitate the achievement of this objective, clearly understood. No action will be taken that would impair the civil and religious rights enjoyed by non-Muslim communities. Jews residing in Palestine, nor the rights or political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. 1920. The San Remo Conference of the Victorious Powers in World War I places Palestine under the British mandate to prepare it for self-government. Jewish immigration to the land of Palestine, which increased in the 19th century, continues. 1922. Britain separates Transjordan from Palestine, preventing Jewish settlement in Transjordan. 1939. The British government proposes limiting Jewish immigration to Palestine to about 10,000 per year, except for emergency cases. 1940s. The Holocaust encourages mass immigration to Palestine. Armed Jewish groups, seeking an independent Jewish state, clash with British authority in Palestine. 1947. The United Nations recommends the partition of Palestine into Arab and Jewish entities, and the subjection of Jerusalem and its surroundings to international control. 1948. With the end of the British Mandate, Israel declares independence and is admitted as a member of the United Nations. 1948 and 1949. The First Arab-Israeli War breaks out, and the war ends with Israel gaining more territory than was allocated to it under the partition plan, including West Jerusalem. Jordan includes the West Bank and East Jerusalem, while Egypt administers the Gaza Strip. About 750,000 Palestinians, out of an estimated 1,200,000, are fleeing or being expelled from their homes. 1949 to 1960. About 1 million Jewish refugees from Muslim-majority countries, as well as 250,000 Holocaust survivors, arrive in Israel. 1956. Israel cooperates with Britain and France in attacking Egypt during the Suez Canal crisis. 1957. Israel begins building a large nuclear reactor in Dimona, in the Negev desert, with French help. The Dimona reactor later became the basis of Israel's nuclear weapons program, the existence of which the state officially denies. 1967. After months of tensions and border clashes, Egypt expels a UN force from the Sinai Desert and closes the Strait of Tiran to Israeli shipping, prompting Israel to launch a preemptive strike against Egypt. Jordan and Syria are involved in the Six-Day War that leads to Israel's control of East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Syrian Golan Heights, Gaza Strip, and Sinai. The Israeli government approved the establishment of Jewish settlements in all these areas. 1973. Egypt and Syria launch a coordinated attack on Israeli forces in Sinai and the occupied Golan Heights. Israel managed to repel the attack, but after suffering heavy losses. The public mood in Israel shifts against the ruling Labor Party. 1975. The United Nations General Assembly ratifies a draft resolution classifying Zionism as a form of racism, but the resolution is repealed in 1991. 1977. In November, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat visits Jerusalem and launches a peace process, culminating in Israel's withdrawal from Sinai and Egypt's recognition of Israel, in accordance with the Camp David Accords of 1978. 1982. Israel invades Lebanon in June in order to expel the PLO leadership, following an assassination attempt on the Israeli ambassador in London by a small Palestinian faction. 1982. In September, a massacre of Palestinians took place in the Sabra and Shatila camps in Beirut, carried out by Israel's allies in the Kateb Party. An investigation by the Israeli government concluded that then Defense Minister Ariel Sharon bore indirect responsibility for the massacre and recommended his dismissal. Mass protests broke out in Israel against the massacre. 1984. The process of transferring Falasha Jews from Ethiopia to Israel begins. 1985. In June, Israel withdraws its troops from most of Lebanese territory, but maintains a security belt in the south. 1986. Former technician Mordecai Vanunu reveals details of Israel's nuclear weapons program in the British press. 1987. The First Palestinian Intifada breaks out in the occupied Palestinian territories, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza establishes Hamas. 1990. The Soviet Union allows Soviet Jews to emigrate to Israel, resulting in an influx of about 1 million of them into the Jewish state. 1991. In January, during the war to liberate Kuwait, Iraq fired 39 rockets at targets in Israel in an attempt to expand the conflict, but Israel declined to respond at U.S. request. 1991. In October, the Madrid Peace Conference was launched, under the auspices of the United States and the Soviet, with the participation of representatives of Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and the Palestinians. 1993. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Accords, which set the framework for the establishment of a Palestinian Authority and ended the First Intifada. 1994. Between May and July, Israel withdraws from most of the Gaza Strip and from the West Bank city of Jericho, allowing Arafat to transfer PLO management from Tunisia and create the Palestinian National Authority. 1994. In October, Israel and Jordan signed the Wadi Araba peace agreement. 1996. The Likud party, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, returns to power in Israel. Netanyahu vows to stop any concessions to the Palestinians, but nevertheless signs the Hebron Protocol and the Wye River Memorandum. Israeli settlement continues. 2000. In May, Israel completes its withdrawal from southern Lebanon. 2000. In September, Likud party leader Ariel Sharon visits Jerusalem's Temple Mount, sparking widespread protests. 2003. In June, the quartet, composed of the United States, the European Union, Russia, and the United Nations, draws up a roadmap for resolving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and proposes the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. Israel and the Palestinian National Authority accept the roadmap, which provides for a freeze on settlement activity in the West Bank and an end to attacks targeting Israelis. 2005. Israel withdraws its troops and settlers from the Gaza Strip in September, but retains control of the territory's airspace, coastal waters, and border crossings. 2006. Israel launches its second war on Lebanon in July, following an attack in which Hezbollah fighters kidnapped 2 Israeli soldiers. 2007. The Annapolis Conference held in November affirms that the two-state solution is the basis for future negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. 2008. In December, Israel launched a large-scale offensive on the Gaza Strip, which it said was aimed at preventing Hamas and others from firing rockets into Israel. 2014. Israel responds to attacks by militants from Gaza with a ground and air offensive on the Strip. Imagine, if people came to your home and lived with you and your family by force. You reject this situation, but they have usurped you and your family, and you are forced to provide them with the basics of hospitality, and if you refuse and demand your property and your home, you will become a terrorist, and with the passage of time the house has become the property of the people who have usurped it and control it, and you are just their guest, but a burdensome guest.